3 million pages of evidence, thousands of unsealed flight logs, millions of data points, names, themes, and timelines connected. You are listening to the Epstein Files, the world's first AI-native investigation into the case that traditional journalism simply could not handle.
Welcome back to the Epstein Files. Last time, we examined why international law enforcement failed to stop Epstein. Today, we are analyzing his private aviation network, what the complete flight log dataset reveals when treated as forensic evidence rather than celebrity name-dropping. As always, every document and source we reference is available at epsteinfiles.fm. So the first aircraft is N908JE, a Boeing 727 purchased from Wexner in 1998. FAA records show Epstein as owner through JE Inc., a Delaware shell, and the aircraft logged over 600 international flights through 2013.
And that aircraft, N908JE, it's really the core of this entire logistical operation. When you treat the data forensically, you look at sources like the J-Mail Encyclopedia or the Book of Black Archives, and you realize this machine, it wasn't just a way to get from point A to point B.
Infrastructure.
It was mobile infrastructure,
Yep.
A base of operations. We're talking about a Boeing 727-200. I mean, this is a commercial airliner. A standard configuration back then would seat, almost 190 people?
But the documents we have on its internal configuration show something completely different.
Completely. And that's where you start to see the intent. The specs show a layout that's all about privacy, about long-duration travel. It had a full master bedroom.
A bedroom on a plane.
A bedroom, multiple lounges, a dining area. And it had that, that very distinctive blue and white striped upholstery that keeps coming up in witness accounts. It was, for all intents and purposes, a flying apartment.
Which means passengers could be on board for days without ever needing to deplane or interact with the outside world.
Precisely. It self-contained the entire environment.
Now, you mentioned the acquisition, August 1998. The chain of custody on that asset is significant.
It is. The purchase was directly from Leslie Wexner, specifically from the Limited Brands. But the asset wasn't transferred to Epstein's name. It went to a company called JE Inc.
JED.
Correct. A Delaware corporation. And from a forensic audit perspective, that's a critical move. It's step one in obscuring ownership.
It creates a legal firewall.
It creates a firewall between the individual, Epstein, and this very high value, very high liability asset. So if you were a journalist or law enforcement in, say, 1999 and you ran the tail number, the FAA database wouldn't show you Jeffrey Epstein. It would show you GGE Inc.
It's a layer of insulation.
A standard practice for the ultra-wealthy. But here, it served to shield the movements of the principal owner from any kind of casual scrutiny.
And the FBI's summaries confirmed that this plane, N908JE, was the primary vehicle for all the long-haul international movement.
It was the absolute workhorse, the primary vessel moving people between New York, Paris, the Caribbean, that whole network. That is until around 2013. The J-Mail archives show a lot of email traffic later on about mechanical issues.
It was an old airframe, a 1968 model.
Very old. By 2009, 2010, the emails show they were already trying to sell it. The maintenance costs must have been astronomical. But for more than a decade, that 727 was the heart of the operation.
Okay, but it wasn't the only aircraft. The 727 gets all the attention because of his size, the so-called Lolita Express moniker.
Right.
But the Gulfstream fleet was doing a huge amount of work, especially domestically.
That's a critical point. The focus on the 727 can obscure the full picture. If you look at the FAA registry records and also the sex offender registration file cited in the J-Mail Encyclopedia, you have to look very, very closely at another tail number, N909JE.
That was a Gulfstream IIB.
A Gulfstream IIB, and its operational role was different. If the 727 was the long-haul flagship, the Gulfstream was the shuttle.
The shuttle.
The shuttle. It was running the Palm Beach to Teterboro route constantly, PBI to Teb, over and over. It's a smaller jet. It's more agile. You don't need the massive ground crew that a 727 requires. It's much less conspicuous.
And then the records show an upgrade.
They do. To N212JE, that's a Gulfstream G550, a 2007 model. That's a huge leap forward in technology and range in avionics.
So as the 727 was aging out, this G550 was modernizing the fleet.
Exactly. The registration data for that aircraft puts it at all the New York area airports. JFK, Newark, and again, Teterboro. It just shows the continuity of the operation.
We also need to get into the helicopters, the rotorcraft.
The last mile logistics. This is how they bridge the gap. You can't land a Boeing 727 or even a Gulfstream on Little St. James, so you fly into St. Thomas.
To Shirley King Airport. TIST.
And then you need a helicopter to make the final hop to the island. The records show a Bell 430 N331JE based in South Florida. It was used for short trips around Boca Raton, Palm Beach, that area. But the forensically significant asset is the other one, N722JE.
The Sikorsky S-76C.
Yes,
Yeah.
because when you pull the FAA records for that specific aircraft, it's explicitly registered to Ghislaine Maxwell.
To her directly.
Directly. Some of the maintenance logs even nickname it Air Ghislaine 2. This is a crucial link. It moves Maxwell from just being a passenger to being an integral part of the transport logistics.
And she could fly it herself.
She held a private pilot certificate for rotorcraft. So she wasn't just directing people onto the helicopter. She had the training and the license to actually pilot the asset that was moving people to and from that private island.
I want to touch on the cost of all this. The infrastructure maintenance. You can't just park a 727 and a fleet of Gulfstreams and helicopters.
No, the burn rate is immense. The email correspondence from 2009 to 2012 in the JMail Encyclopedia really pulls back the curtain on this. You see emails discussing Boeing 727 sim training.
Simulator training for the pilots.
Right. It's highly specialized. You need constant recurring training to stay certified on an airframe like that. The emails are full of discussions about parts, inspections, high maintenance requirements. It confirms this wasn't just a rich guy with a plane. This was a fully staffed, fully funded aviation department. A private airline, essentially, with a passenger list of one, plus his associates.
Which brings us to the people flying these aircraft, the pilots. Their testimony is where the mechanics of the operation really become clear. They're the ones filing the plans. They're the ones seeing who gets on and off.
The hardware is just the tool. The human element, the crew, they explain the methodology. And for that, we have to start with the chief pilot, Larry Visosky.
Hired in the mid-90s, becomes chief pilot around 2000.
Correct. So he's there for the peak operational period. He's managing the aircraft, the maintenance, the ground logistics. But his FBI interview summaries, the 302s from November 2020, they contain one specific detail about customs that explains how the whole international network was even possible.
This is the so-called customs loophole.
It is. It's a critical piece of forensic evidence. Visosky testified under oath that when they flew from the U.S. mainland, let's say from Teterboro in New Jersey or Palm Beach in Florida, out to St. Thomas in the U.S. Virgin Islands.
They did not have to clear U.S. customs upon arrival.
Exactly. Because you're flying from one U.S. jurisdiction to another, it's considered a domestic flight.
But the reverse isn't true. The reverse is not true. Flying from St. Thomas back to the mainland, that did require a full customs and immigration procedure.
So the implication is the outbound leg was functionally unmonitored at the federal level.
Precisely. If you want to transport someone, a minor, someone with passport issues, or just someone you don't want a federal entry record for, you fly them to the island. There is no U.S. Customs and Border Protection record generated when that plane lands in St. Thomas from the mainland. You can move people from New York directly to the doorstep of the trafficking operation without that specific layer of federal scrutiny.
And Visosky's testimony confirms this was their standard operating procedure.
It confirms this regulatory gap was exploited as a matter of routine.
Visosky also went into detail about Epstein's relationship with the customs officers for the return trips when they did have to clear.
He did. And this is another piece of the puzzle. Visosky stated that Epstein would specifically instruct him to call certain CBP officers by name.
To keep the port open after hours, for one. But it was more than just logistics. Epstein actively cultivated these relationships. He'd make small talk, he knew their names, their families, and Visosky mentions that Epstein occasionally gave CBP officers rides in the helicopter.
That sounds like a clear compromise of checkpoint security.
It's what you'd call soft corruption. It's not a direct bribe. It's building rapport, doing favors, making yourself a friend of the port. So when your jet lands late at night and you need a quick clearance, maybe with a passenger manifest that looks a little unusual, you're not dealing with an anonymous federal agent. You're dealing with someone who you gave a helicopter ride to last month. It greases the wheels.
Now, besides Visosky, we also have the logs kept by the other main pilot,
Captain David Rogers. And if Visosky was the manager, Rogers was the scribe, the record keeper. His flight logs, particularly from 97 to 2003, give us the most granular data we have.
because he used initials.
He used initials. He didn't just write 3 passengers. He wrote J.E. for Jeffrey Epstein, G.M. for Ghislaine Maxwell, S.K. for Sarah Kellen. It allows us to place specific individuals on specific flights on specific dates. His records are invaluable.
And he was employed for a long time as well.
A very long time. There are emails from as late as 2010 showing Rogers was still on the payroll, still flying about 59 days a year, even when Visosky was the chief pilot. This tells you the circle of trust was extremely small. The same few people were flying these planes and seeing these passengers for decades.
And for the 727, there was a third crew member required.
Yes, this is an important technical point. A Boeing 727 has a 3-person cockpit. You need a pilot, a co-pilot, and a flight engineer. The flight engineer station is a whole panel of its own.
So it's not a 2-person job like a modern airliner.
Not at all. And email correspondence from 2001 identifies Larry Morrison as the flight engineer. The significance is that it confirms every single movement of that 727 required a minimum of 3 crew members in the cockpit. So for every flight we analyze on that specific plane, you have to remember there are at least 3 professional witnesses up front.
Okay, let's move on to the routes themselves. When you plot all this data from the logs, a very clear geographic pattern emerges.
We call it the trafficking triangle. The analysis in the Book of Black and the unredacted flight logs, volume 17, is unambiguous. The primary commute is Teterboro, New Jersey.
The New York hub.
The main hub for Manhattan private aviation. It lets you bypass the chaos of JFK or LaGuardia. The logs show hundreds and hundreds of departures from TB. The second point is Palm Beach, Florida.
On PBI.
The winter base of operations.
The winter base. And the third point of the triangle is St. Thomas, TIST. That's the gateway to the island. So you have this constant circulation of aircraft between these 3 points.
And the data also shows a distinct seasonal pattern to the travel. A very clear one. And it's logical. It mimics the social calendar of the wealthy elite. From November through March, the flight activity is heavily concentrated in the Caribbean. Palm Beach, St. Thomas.
And then in the warmer months.
From May to September, the center of gravity shifts north. The movements are more focused on New York and trips to Europe, Paris, London, Nice. This trafficking operation hid in plain sight by mirroring the legitimate travel patterns of the social class they were embedded in.
But there are outliers in that data, specifically flights that don't fit the East Coast or European pattern. I'm thinking of the flights to Zorro Ranch.
The flights to Santa Fe Municipal Airport, SAF. This is where the data becomes chillingly specific. We can pull up one data point. March 29, 2001. There's a flight logged from Teterboro, TB, to Santa Fe, SF.
And the passenger manifest for that specific flight.
According to the logs, the manifest lists Jeffrey Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell, Virginia Roberts, Alberto Pinto, Banu Kukulu, Marvin Minsky, Henry Cherokee.
Let's pause on that. You have Virginia Roberts, who we know was minor at the time.
And Marvin Minsky, a towering figure in artificial intelligence from MIT, on the same flight.
On the same private jet, flying to a remote private ranch in New Mexico.
That's the forensic significance. It's not just an allegation. The flight log physically places a known victim and a high-profile academic in the same confined space, traveling to an isolated location owned by Epstein. It corroborates the core claim of the entire conspiracy, the mixing of victims with the powerful and influential.
Let's drill down more on these passenger manifests.
Yeah.
We've just mentioned Virginia Roberts-Giuffre. The flight logs show her traveling with a very high frequency.
It's statistically significant. When you cross-reference the Epstein flight logs unredacted with the JMIL Encyclopedia, she is documented on at least 23 distinct flights. And that's just what we can identify between December 2000 and August 2002.
And this creates a verifiable timeline of her movements.
It creates a concrete, documented timeline of trafficking. You can pull specific examples. December 11th, 2000, a flight from Palm Beach to Teterboro. The manifest lists Roberts, Maxwell, Epstein, and Emmy Taylor.
Okay. And then just a few days later.
6 days later, December 17th, 2000, a flight from Teterboro down to St. Thomas. The manifest this time. Roberts, Maxwell, Epstein, and Alberto Pinto.
So in less than 1 week, the flight logs place her moving across the entire trafficking triangle, from Florida to New York to the Caribbean.
Exactly. It takes the allegations made in court filings and anchors them to hard data. It moved the claim from pure testimony to documentary evidence. The logs prove she was being transported between the key trafficking hubs during the exact time she alleges the abuse was occurring.
We also have to address the Clinton trip, November 2003.
Right. The Book of Black and the unredacted logs allow for a full forensic reconstruction of that entire itinerary. It wasn't a single flight, it was a multi-day transcontinental tour on the Boeing 727.
Can you walk us through the dates and locations from the logs?
Of course. It starts November 4th, 2003. The jet flies from Brussels to Oslo, then on to Stockholm. The next day, November 5th, it goes from Stockholm back to Oslo, then all the way to Brunei.
A huge leg of the journey.
A very long flight. November 6th, it flies from Brunei to Hong Kong. And on November 7th, from Hong Kong into mainland China with stops in Chengdu and Beijing.
And the passenger manifest for this multi-day trip.
It explicitly lists President Bill Clinton. It also lists members of his Secret Service detail by name. This data point is crucial because it directly contradicts public statements that suggested a very limited, brief association. This log documents a 4-day, multi-country trip across Europe and Asia. That implies, cohabitation on that aircraft for an extended period.
Another name that appears frequently in the logs is Jean-Luc Brunel.
The French modeling agent, yes. There's a flight on June 21st, 2002 that is particularly significant.
What was the route?
Palm Beach to Nassau in the Bahamas, and then from Nassau up to JFK in New York. And it's the passenger list that tells the story.
Who's on board?
The log lists: Virginia Roberts, Ghislaine Maxwell, Jeffrey Epstein, Sarah Kellen, Cindy Lopez, Jean-Luc Brunel, and a pilot, Pete Rathgeb.
So you have the entire core of the operation on one flight.
It's a perfect microcosm of the conspiracy. You have the financier, Epstein, the primary recruiter, Maxwell, the scheduler, Kellen. You have the victim, Virginia Roberts. And you have the affiliated agent, the international partner, Jean-Luc Brunel. All in the same cabin. It documents his deep integration into the logistics of the network.
What about Alan Dershowitz? He also appears in the records.
He does. A flight on February 9th, 1998. The route is from Palm Beach up to Teterboro. The manifest for that flight reads, J.E.T., one female, Alan Dershowitz, Glenn Dubin, Warren Whitted.
And that entry, one female.
That entry is a major forensic issue. It's an anonymized passenger. And this isn't a one-off. It's a pattern you see again and again throughout these logs. 1 female, 2 females, masseuse. It prevents a full positive identification of every single person on board.
So it's an intentional gap in the record.
It appears to be. In the context of that Dershowitz flight, the anonymity of that one female passenger is a significant missing piece of data. But the presence of the entry itself proves that an unidentified woman was on that flight with that specific group of men.
Let's shift to the international operations. We've talked about the customs loophole for the USVI, but what about flights to Europe, specifically to France?
The Paris operations are frequent. Paris-Le Bourget Airport, LFPB, shows up again and again. There's one flight, March 6, 2001. The log shows the plane flew from Canada, Stephenville, CYJT, to Le Bourget.
And the manifest?
Virginia Roberts, Maxwell, Epstein, Emmy Taylor.
So this is an international border crossing with a minor. This would require passports, customs, immigration on the French side.
It would. And this connects directly back to what the pilot, Larry Visosky, told the FBI. He mentioned in his interview that Epstein would get into arguments with customs officers, specifically about female passengers traveling on foreign passports.
What was the nature of the argument?
Visosky said Epstein would insist it was an immigration issue only. That was the phrase he used.
What does that even mean, an immigration issue only?
It seems to be a piece of semantic gamesmanship. A way to pressure or confuse the officers. He was essentially arguing that as long as the person had a valid passport, their reason for travel, their age, their relationship to him, none of that was the customs officer's business. It suggests he was actively interfering with standard border control protocols. He was running interference to get these women and girls through checkpoints with minimal scrutiny.
Finally, we have to talk about what's not in the records. Evidence destruction.
Right. What we have is what survived. FBI memos that are cited in the J-Mail Encyclopedia are very clear on this. During the 2005 police investigation in Palm Beach, Sarah Kellen gave a direct instruction to staff.
To shred documents.
To remove phone books and other records and shred them. They were actively destroying contact lists.
And if they were destroying phone books?
Then you have to ask, what else were they destroying? We have the official flight logs, the ones required by the FAA for maintenance and so on. But a private aviation operation like this generates a mountain of informal paperwork. Handwritten manifests for the ground crew. Catering orders that list exactly who is on board. Ground transportation logs.
Records that might have had the real names instead of one female.
Precisely. Given how deeply integrated Sarah Kellen was in the flight operations, she's SK in the logs over and over, It is highly probable that a purge of these informal aviation records happened at the same time they were shredding everything else.
So the data set we're working with, as comprehensive as it is likely incomplete.
We have the skeleton. The official filings and Captain Rogers' detailed logs, they give us the structure. But the connective tissue, the informal notes, the catering orders for 2 passengers and 2 masseuses, that's the material that was most likely targeted for destruction.
So to summarize all of these findings from the aviation data, what have we proven?
I think we've proven several key facts. The ownership is proven through shell companies like Jeji Inc. The routes are proven, that trafficking triangle between Teterboro, Palm Beach, and St. Thomas. The passenger lists are proven, this consistent mixing of victims with powerful elites, and the exploitation of regulatory gaps, especially that USVI customs loophole, is confirmed by pilot testimony.
So the flight logs are more than just travel documents. They function as a forensic timeline of the entire operation.
They are the circulatory system. They prove the where and the when that corroborates the victim's testimony about what happened. They provide the scaffolding of hard data that the entire case is built on.
And yet there are still these significant unknowns, these anonymized entries.
That's the key limitation of the data. We have 1,971 individual flight entries in the master log, but the number of entries that just say 1 female, 2 females, that represents the dark figure of this data set, the true number of victims and associates who pass through this network. Their identities remain the missing variable.
Next time, we are going to follow the money, the cryptocurrency trail, how digital money enabled the network.
Because you can't keep a Boeing 727, 2 Gulfstreams, and a pair of helicopters in the air for 20 years without a massive and very discreet flow of cash. The logistics required to keep that network airborne are, in themselves, staggering to consider.
You have just heard an analysis of the official record. Every claim, name, and date mentioned in this episode is backed by primary source documents. You can view the original files for yourself at epsteinfiles.fm. If you value this data-first approach to journalism, please leave a 5-star review wherever you're listening right now. It helps keep this investigation visible. We'll see you in the next file.